My name's Eliaichi Kimaro, and I am a Seattle-based filmmaker. Actually, I'm an activist turned filmmaker. I think of myself as an activist who happens to have made a movie. So I'm here with the Cascade Festival of African Films with my personal documentary, A Lot Like You, and I'm just excited to be here, yeah. Eliaichi Kimaro, that is my grandmother's name. So I think it's tribal tradition. My dad is from, he's a Chaga man from Mount Kilimanjaro. And so the naming tradition is to name your firstborn after, so my dad, God, you see what I mean? So I'm named after my grandmother. Her name is Eliaichi. Then I'm named after my dad, Sadikiel, and then the family name Kimaro. So if I meet anyone, if I tell them my name, they can place who I am, where I am in relation to everyone else in the family, and place my generation and everything. So there are actually a lot of Eliaichi Kimaros in my family, because my dad's the youngest of 6, and just about all of their firstborn daughters, his siblings' firstborn daughters, were named Eliaichi. So there's a lot of us. I did not have a background as a filmmaker. My background is as a social justice activist. I was doing a lot of rape and domestic violence counseling work. And I was doing that work when I had the idea to make this movie. So I was driving to work and I was actually listening to a song that's in the movie. The whole movie came to me, was inspired by a song. And that song is Angelique Kidjo, who's singing Summertime in the movie. And I was listening to the song for the first time and I was driving to work, and two things happened when I heard the song. The first one was that I felt completely transported back to my summers that I spent in Tanzania growing up. It was so visceral. I could see the sights outside the car window as I'm driving from the farmhouse on Mount Kilimanjaro down into town, and all the ostriches and zebras and giraffe and gazelle that we would pass just on the drive into town, you know? And so it's playing out in my mind like a movie on the one hand, and then the other hand, I'm having this realization. I'm in a relationship of my own. I'm thinking of having kids, and it hits me that it's going to be up to me one day to pass down this culture that I've inherited from my dad, this Chaga culture. And so there's a panic that sets in because I've been back to Tanzania 12 times every other summer growing up, but when I thought about what culture would I be passing down, I had no idea. I had no clue. I didn't know songs, I didn't know dances, I didn't know folklore. And so I had this panic realization of, oh my gosh, it's gonna be up to me to pass down this culture. How am I gonna do it? And then also at the same time, these images are playing out in my head like a movie. And so it's almost like the question and answer hit me at the same time. Oh, of course. I just need to go back and make a movie. That's how I can capture this culture that my kid is inheriting, is I'll go back there and I'll sit down with my family and I'll ask them questions about growing up there, and I'll capture this culture on video so that I can bring it home and make it feel real and live and relevant to our kids growing up here in the US. And so that's how the idea for this film was born, and the inspiration came out of that panic of considering what my cultural legacy would be and not really knowing what that would, how I would convey that and pass it on. So Lucy is 6 now, and the film is dedicated to her at the end, and she takes that very, very seriously. So she really feels like, when I'm traveling with the film and I'm going to festivals and I'm talking on her behalf. Because she just feels like, this film is doing its work in the world and it's her film and it exists because of her and she knows it. And so she has an ownership over it that's amazing. And I've traveled with her to some festivals where she's been at screenings, and we've sat through she's never really made it all the way through. But she makes it about 40 minutes in, and then we go out and get a drink and we come back. And it's always around the time when this story's taking a turn. And so I've always been prepared to have the conversations that would that would come after she watches the film. But she's never actually made it to the harder, more sticky, challenging parts. And so, she's just, and she's starting to do Q&As with me now. She's starting to introduce the film and answer some questions at Q&As afterwards. She has a very strong sense of ownership over the movie that I love. I think the thing that I find compelling about having festivals that highlight and focus on African filmmakers is the ability to have access to these stories that we wouldn't have access to otherwise, right? We are bombarded all the time with images in the media about African and the African experience, but so rarely is that told from the African perspective, you know? And also the stories that we hear tend to be very monolithic. There is a story of the African experience that if that is all we have access to, then we are severely, we're really, really limiting our understanding of just how diverse the African experience and the African diaspora is. And so I think what you get when you have African filmmakers who are telling their own stories from their own perspective, you really get to see the diversity of the African experience, right? You get to see, hear stories from the entire diaspora that so often get left out. And oftentimes we are, as women and as Africans, we are so often the objects of other people's stories, right? We very rarely get to be the subject of our own stories. And so as I move this film out into the world, that's what I find really compelling, and that's what I find amazing, is to support people, support women of color, support African women and African girls and girls of color, to really to consider the fact that they have the right to take up the space with their stories. Our conversations need their stories, right? We need to have a more diverse representation of the human experience than what we are being fed by mainstream media. And so having festivals like this that put a lens on the African experience very particularly, very intentionally, and they center that. That's the conversation that's centered. The conversations that we're having, that I had at this festival after our screening, was amazing because it's coming from a very African-centric perspective, which is not the norm for me as I move this film out into the world. And so it's been a blessing to just have, there's a certain given that we have, like a shorthand and there's a certain perspective that is shared, a shared value and a shared perspective that, which is where we get to start the conversation from, which is oftentimes where I'm trying to get people to by the end of our conversations, but that's where we started the conversation here, and then we went deeper. And so that's been amazing, you know? So for someone who's coming maybe as a participant to the Cascade Festival of African Films, I think the thing that I didn't know is just the community that has been built up around this festival over 23 years. It's so apparent, like the level of investment that people have and the passion that they have for African film. And it just, as I have conversations with people who've been involved at the festival and organizers and volunteers, it seems that once people get plugged into this festival, they never leave, right? And that to me is very, very telling of the level of passion and involvement and investment that people have in getting these stories seen. The accessibility is another piece that is amazing. The fact that that all screenings are free and open to the public, to me speaks volumes to the mission of the festival, of wanting to make sure that there are no barriers to people being able to hear and see and experience these stories firsthand. And I think that's beautiful. And so I think what people might find surprising is just the degree of love and commitment and passion around African filmmaking and African storytelling that exists in this community. I had no idea that it existed. I mean, I knew about the festival, but in terms of just knowing how, here's something that hit me at lunch, that the planning around this festival is not a community that gets activated around the festival and then dissipates until the next festival. It's a year-round community that is just constantly celebrating and immersed in the love of African film. And I think that was very surprising to me, that these are folks who've been in each other's lives. Filmmakers have been born and raised into this community and are now fiercely like sharing their own stories from their own perspective and just being fierce, fierce about what they're capable of has been amazing, you know? So I think that would be surprising. For filmmakers, what I would say to filmmakers who are considering whether or not to have their film show at the Cascade Festival of African Films is not enough to just show your film. If at all possible, you have to come and you need to be present for the screening because the attendance is amazing, but the quality of conversation that comes after the film, the post-screening conversation, how deep people are willing to go and how invested they are in making those connections, it runs deep and it's worth it to make the trip just for the conversation alone. So that's what I would say to my fellow filmmakers who are considering maybe coming is you gotta come. And you need to be here. You need to be here in person to be a part of that conversation. Cascade Festival of African Films is about conversation. It's about digging deeper. It's about exploring the African experience through the African lens. It's about considering the lens that we all bring to the stories of our lives and making connections to cultures other than our own. Cascade Festival of African Films is about bridging cultures and about deepening our understanding of who we are as a race, as the human race. The Cascade Festival of African Films is a celebration of storytelling and of culture. The Cascade Festival of African Films is about broadening the discourse, the conversation that's happening about the human experience. The Cascade Festival of African Films is about pulling the lens back and bringing more people into the conversation about and expanding our narrative about the human experience, right? To include folks whose stories are so often marginalized and hearing those stories from their perspective, through their lens, you know, and just centering their experience. And I think that's a profoundly radical thing to do. For me, one of the things that has been surprising for me, and I live in Seattle and I come down to Portland all the time, but what I did not realize was that there was this community in Portland that is so passionate about African films. And when I got into the festival, I heard from some friends in Portland that they were so excited that I got in, and I didn't realize this, but they were like, they're some of your biggest fans. They're some of the biggest fans, you know, and they come every year. And what I realized here was there's a whole community of folks who are just so passionate about African film. I just didn't know. And so the fact, what I love is the accessibility, the fact that the screenings are free. Working on this film has changed my life in ways that I could have anticipated, right? Prior to making this, I had never thought of making a movie. I was an activist, but I've always been a writer. I've always written in my journal, right? And so as I was working on this film, originally it wasn't supposed to be about me. It was the story I was trying to tell was about my dad and his journey moving back home after living overseas for 40 years and the disconnect between the family and culture and his struggle to fit back in. And so that's the story I was trying to tell for 7 years. And then in the 8th and final year, you know, the truths that were emerging about the experiences of women in my family, experiences of gender violence in my family, I couldn't turn away from that. And so the story shifted and it ended up becoming about me and my journey. And so I had to figure out how to tell this story. A lot of the scenes remained the same, but how to shift the narrative so that now I was telling my own story and not my dad's. And that was really hard. It was really hard because, the hardest part for me wasn't the writing. It was believing that I had the right to take up the space with my story. And that if I told my story from my point of view, that my struggle was believing that it would matter to anyone but me, you know? But what I found after the fact, working on the film, was the more personal we got in our storytelling, the more vulnerable we were willing to get with the storytelling, the more people were able to see themselves reflected back, their experiences, their families reflected back at them from the screen, you know? And that has been the most amazing thing, because I've never created anything. I've never made art that I put out into the world. So aside from my daughter, like, this is the only thing I've ever made, you know? And to see the response that this film is having. And you know, as I was working on the film, parts of my life that were formerly very disparate have come together. So I was an activist, and then I made this movie, but working, like, in telling the story and figuring out what the story is from my perspective, the art and the activism has come together, you know? Who I am politically out in the world and my personal existence with my family and how I identify has come together. And so this film now, because of it, I'm able to move through the world from a much more fluid, much more integrated place, you know, where I feel like I can bring my whole self to any conversation, you know? So in that sense, it's changed my life. And what my role is now, I think, with this film is to find ways to move this film out into the world that will allow conversations like the one we had here with the festival, allow these conversations to happen, partnering with nonprofit organizations who are working on issues related to the film. So nonprofit organizations who are working on issues of gender violence, whether that's FGM, whether it's child sexual abuse, working on multicultural issues or mixed race experience, or folks who are looking at how race, class, gender all shape who we are and how we identify. Just partnering with organizations who feel like they can use this film to further their missions. That's what I want to do, because that's really my lifeblood, is being an activist. And so I feel like we have this tool now, and this tool it's really effective at opening up conversations and getting people to sort of reflect on you know, on so many different aspects of their lives. So I really want to figure out how we can use this film as a springboard for those conversations to affect the kind of change we want to see in the world. My daughter Lucy has seen the movie. She's 6.5 now, and the film is dedicated to her. And at the very end, it says "for Lucy," and she takes that very, very seriously. And so, you know, I've taken her to some festivals, and actually, here's the thing that I really love about traveling with her. So the first festival she came to was in San Francisco, and I got up and I introduced the film at the beginning, and then we sat down, we watched the film together, and you know, halfway through everyone's laughing because mom and dad are talking about how they met, and she leans over to me and she's like, "Mom, I think they like the movie," you know? I'm like, "I think you're right," you know? And then afterwards, you know, when the film was done, I got up to talk after the film was over, and I don't know how I knew, but I was looking at her and I could see that she got it. She could feel that there was the quality of presence that people were bringing to our conversation afterwards was very different. And before I even said anything afterwards, she could feel the difference. And she got it in that moment. And I've never, ever had to explain to her why I'm traveling with a film or why I'm away from home so much, because she felt the difference herself. And she could understand, like, the work that the film is doing and the conversations that it's starting, even at 6. She gets that it's doing work that's bigger than us, and she's never complained. She understands that, like, you know, the film, Mama has to travel with my film and go and show up for the conversations that come up, you know, but she gets that there's deeper work that's happening when we show the film and we connect with people afterwards. So my name's Eliaichi Kimaro, and I am the film director of A Lot Like You, and I'm so excited to be here at the Cascade Festival of African Films to be able to share our film and engage in conversation afterwards. And I love that there's this festival and this space that exists for us to sort of celebrate and come together around African films and African stories told through an African lens.